Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Option webinar series. My name is Vivek Bhatnagar. I am a CTO and founder for UnifyCloud. Let's talk about, first of all, these readiness guides. So these readiness guides are very well defined documentation to prepare like cloud environment, like before building anything. And these guides are also available like inside Azure portal. So if you go to Azure portal, like if I can share it with you, then you can always see these guides as part of the quick centers. For example, if you can see on the screen, this is my login to the Azure portal. And if I go to quick start center, I can see that there are Azure setup guides, Azure migration guides, and Azure innovation guides. So I can actually go ahead and start using these guides even step by step from the portal itself. For example, if I click on Azure setup guide, it will open Azure setup guide, which will actually tell me that what I need to do, how do I organize resources or manage access. And it not only give me a rational to use it, but also give some sort of steps to do it. So I can actually understand the steps from here only and go, and I can actually start from here by clicking the button. So very well organized guides into Azure, like a quick start center, and mainly organized in like you can say like 6 or 7 main areas. So if you look at these guides are focused on organization, like so how do you organize your Azure subscription, how do you set up management hierarchy to consistently apply access control policy and compliances to the group of resources, or you go and use tracking for related resources. And then it talks about how do you manage access. So there are role-based access. So there are already RBAC roles which are built in Azure, and you can actually use them to decide like how people are going to do, how people are going to come to the portal or access any of your Azure resources. And then the thirdly, it will manage on the cost and billing. And this is very important, like in the cloud time to manage it properly from costing and billing side. It is about identification of your subscription type, putting different limits, putting the budgets and other thing. And then the next step is plan for governance, security, and compliance. And these are like enforcing your corporate policies. If you have any applicable legal requirements, how you're going to meet them in the cloud. If you have need a long time storage, what you're going to do. Once you have passed governance, then we focus on monitoring and reporting and to get visibility across resources to find and fix the problem, optimize performance, and gain insight into customer behavior. With all these things, one thing is very important, that cloud is always a moving target. So typically Microsoft Azure is releasing 4 features, or if you actually remove the weekends, 4.5 features every day. For it's humanly like impossible for anyone to keep a track with the amount of changes and improvements coming to the public cloud platform, and Azure is one of them. So how do you keep yourself current? What minimum things you can actually read maybe over the weekend or maybe every day to keep yourself current and understand like any of the changes in Azure. So this all basically goes into a process of these guides, and I highly recommend to go through these readiness guide whenever you start building it. So let's look at a little bit more in detail, like what they talked about and what mainly concept are here. The first concept, which is very important, how do you organize your resources? So how do you combine? How do you have, if you have management, if you have like multiple subscription, how do you organize them? How do you organize resources, resource groups, and other things? There is also a Microsoft template to organizing it. So there is a Microsoft Excel worksheet which you can actually open it and look at for these purposes. But here you can see that management groups is one of the main concept, and this group is nothing but it is a container that help you manage access policies, compliances for multiple subscription. So you can group multiple subscription into one management group, and then you can define these policies. And all subscription in that management group automatically inherit the conditions applied to that management group. So it is very important concept and should be used. And it basically it is very simple also to build it and in change like in case you need. Finally, how do you do subscription-based management? And subscription, again, logically associate user accounts and the resources that are created by those user account. And there are a lot of like limits and quotas on amount of resources that you can create inside the subscription and use it. And you can also define your limits and quotas. Uh, an organization can also use subscription to manage costs and resources that are created by users, team, or project. Finally, like resource group, which is a workable unit for majority of developers, and it is again a logical containers for all Azure resources like web pages, databases, VMs, storage accounts, and other thing, and manage. And lastly, resources itself, for example, your VMs, your storage, your SQL databases, those. So this is the typical hierarchy that which we always ask people that they should actually go and actually and manage from this perspective. Um, and also, like once you organize these, typically the next challenge is how do you give the access to these resources? Because in the cloud, because of nature of the cloud, a lot of people have access to the main assets, and it is always important that we just apply some role-based controls and other things. And this is just a very brief introduction of the how role-based control available in Azure. There are more than like I think more than 70 to 80 standard roles available in Azure, which you can use. Some of the main roles are listed here, like reader or contributor, owner's role. And these roles you can define at all the three levels. You can define it at the subscription level. You can define it like resource group level, or you can also define it as a resource level. It is always advisable to define these roles in instead of like 80 groups, not for an individual. Um, so it's always easy to deal with groups than individual users, and also simplify the maintenance and access policies, provide consistent access management across team, reduce a lot of configuration errors. So that's why we always recommend use groups, 80 groups. And Azure role-based access control are primary method of managing access in Azure. That's always advisable to use it and this. Um, while you plan for this access control strategy, thinking of always grant users the least privilege required to get their work done. And that's the principle which I or every all people recommend, that that always follow the least privilege that a person required. So if person required just to manage a VM, then they may get permission only on the VM, nothing else. Or if a person job is to just to collect costing data, so you can give the costing data. So always follow that principle, that least privilege. And in case they need access to more of, they are not able to do work, they will come back to you and ask for more permission. So start with the least privilege and then maybe add more privileges to them. And I advise everyone to review this like at least every month, what access is happening, look at the reports, avoid anybody giving too much access, even read access, like nobody should have too much access or on any of your resources, because accounts do get hacked and people lose their credential to some lot more time to people. So it's very important that we actually do this access management correctly and move things accordingly. So so once we talked about let's talk about like something about cost and billing. And this is a favorite topic like everywhere. Like once people are in on Azure, the main objective is, okay, how do I manage cost and billing? Cloud has given a lot of flexibility to developers, and they are free to actually start a VM of any size, and they are sometimes free to do anything inside. And typically developers might not think about like how much the cost and other thing, or might not worry about like stopping and other sources. So managing cost and billing and thinking ahead of time is one of the most effective planning and methods in Azure. And typically cost management tasks are performed by finance management and app group. Microsoft has given a service called Azure Cost Management, which actually help you in making this cost management very effective and in an optimized way. So this Microsoft cost management service can basically help you in analyzing cloud cost. It basically help you to aggregate on accounts. You can see like how much you are spending for different resource groups or your subscriptions or resources. It will allow you to cut and dice these things. You can also put your budgets for your resource group and for your subscriptions, and then you can actually monitor those budgets. You can get an alert if 80% of budgets used another thing. You will also get some lot of like optimization recommendations that how these things can be optimized, and you can always definitely manage your invoice and payments and other visibilities. So it's very important to understand Azure cost management and use this effectively and use it like when you start setting up these things. Okay, so the next thing in setup guide is talk about CAF governance model. So as you establish a corporate policy or plan your governance strategy, you can always use tools and services available in Azure, like Azure Policy, Azure Blueprints, or Azure Security Center, to enforce and automate your organization governance decision. So before you start your governance planning, there is also a tool in Microsoft that which maybe we may discuss like in a governance session. Is governance benchmark tool. I highly recommend to use that tool. It will help you to think a little bit more structurally when you go and build these kind of governance things. As this in this screen, like there are like overarching functions that people do. So they classify and mitigate their business risk, policy compliance, and processes. But there are like five main discipline of cloud governance: cost control, which is about all about cost and the things; security baselines, like how do you ensure compliances and security baseline. And this is very important for CIOs and all to sleep peacefully in the night. Then resource consistency is about configuration data. So how you can maintain configuration consistent and you make sure that nobody's changing them. Then you have identity baseline, and finally deployment accelerators like DevOps. So these are the five governance like discipline in Azure. And it is almost mandatory to talk about these before you start any migration and modernization process. Get a general agreement on this. And it is not advisable to always try to solve it to the last detail. Like you can always think about these discipline in the context of workload you are migrating. So if you are migrating first workload, you don't need to spend too much time on these things. Just in the context of the first workload, you plan all these things and move ahead. And you can improve these things as you add many like other additional workloads. Just to show you that what other services are available like while using these. So you can see that these are the all Azure services available to implement. For example, cost management, you can implement like Azure Cost Management, Azure Advisor. There is also Azure Policy, you can implement cost. You can also include the Azure cost element while building an Azure Blueprint. And definitely you can go to Azure Portal and other aspect to manage the cost. Similarly, if you look at the business on the security baseline side, mainly like security centers, Azure Sentinel, which is a new product from Microsoft, and Azure encryption, hybrid identity, networking, and automation. These are the services. Some of them just dedicated to security, like Azure Security Center and Azure Sentinel. But other services can also do something around security. For example, identity is around security or identity, or Azure networking has a larger component to manage and securing networks. And simply Azure automation allow you to do the security things in an automated fashion. Resource consistency. This is again one of the important aspect of knowing that whether configurations are correct or not. And the main tool here is resource graph and resource graph APIs, which actually give you the configuration for each and every resource in Azure, and then you can use its values to configure your blueprints, policies, monitors, and other aspect of things. If you talk about identity, is all about Azure AD, on Azure AD, B2C, and other services, directory, federations, and other thing. And you can always use the same identity to configure your RBACs and Blueprint. Lastly, like it's about deployment acceleration, and again, it is all about Azure DevOps. How do you use Azure DevOps, and then how do you have these elements into resource group templates and Azure Advisor and tagging and other thing. So these are the five main discipline and highly advisable to use these discussion at the time of readiness phase and other thing. Not only these tools and services which are given by Microsoft Azure, but there are a lot of third-party services are available. And some of them are very popular. For example, like for cost management, you have HashiCorp, Terraform, or you have F5 and Palo Alto and Cisco and other aspect of things for managing baseline security, ServiceNow for discovery, then RSA, another aspect for identity. So these are the third-party services which are available. And when I say available means that these are tested and approved by Microsoft to work on Azure cloud. And so you can actually get a lot of them as a sometime like as a VM images and other things. So it's easier to use. These are certified to work on Azure. They have their Azure version. They also have their Azure pricing and other thing. However, I just want to give like my personal opinion on this. Um, it is always better to use Azure first-party services from integration point of view, because Azure first-party services are very well supported and very well integrated across the whole Azure end-to-end. So it is like extremely easy to, for example, implementation of Azure Firewall, then implementation of F5 or implementation of Cisco Firewall on Azure. And the problem which at least I have faced in a lot of my projects, that in case there is a problem, for example, you are implementing F5 firewall on Azure and you are stuck with some issues, then what you do, like you call like F5 and they say, okay, this is not issue from F5, this is from Microsoft Azure. And you call Microsoft Azure for that issue, they say, no, this is for F5 and call F5. And I have seen this consistently, like, unless until you actually invite both of them on one call and you say, guys, now help me resolving this issue. And that is a quite tedious and time taking process. And I have seen that has increased my workload many folds. So the things which we can do in a week time has taken more than 2 months, because it's very hard to get the two company agree to it and then see that what's going on and other thing. Another aspect of problem is that Azure is changing very fast. So Azure changes and move to the next version of their APIs, but these third parties are little slow in moving with Azure and they stay with their previous APIs. And then as a customer, you are stuck. Now what you do, like, are you roll back and you, because you're trying to work with latest APIs of Azure, but F5 or other things are not available for that. So it's a real like effort. So to be careful, like when you select a third party services, and I'm not advising that don't go for third party, go for third party services where you really need, but also build time and efforts and estimate accordingly, because it's a third party service and you might need to, it will take a lot of time to do this.